Let's begin with a single, staggering fact. The most expensive square meter of land in the Philippines today is not in a historic district or a presidential palace. It is a stretch of pavement on Ayala Avenue in Makati City, where the country's stock exchange resides and where skyscrapers house multinational banks. The average price for land here can exceed 500,000 Philippine pesos per square meter. And nearly every single piece of this golden real estate, for over 60 city blocks, is owned, leased, or was originally sold by one family. A family whose story begins not with a visionary tech genius, but with a Spanish naval officer, a colonial land title, and a swamp. This is the story of the Zobel de Ayala dynasty. To call them merely rich is to call the Pacific Ocean damp. They are the architects of modern Philippine capitalism. Their corporate empire, the Ayala Corporation, is a colossal conglomerate with tentacles in real estate, banking, telecommunications, water infrastructure, and renewable energy. Its market capitalization runs into tens of billions of dollars. But to understand how they became the country's preeminent business family, you must first understand the foundational, uncomfortable truth. Their empire was seeded during the twilight of Spanish colonial rule, in an act of economic transformation that permanently altered the Philippine landscape and its distribution of wealth. When Spain claimed the Philippines in the 16th century, its economic model was simple: extraction and monopoly. The Crown's primary interest was the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, a legendary maritime route that saw Spanish galleons laden with Mexican silver sail to Manila, where they traded for Chinese silks, porcelain, and spices to bring back to the Americas. This trade created a small, fabulously wealthy merchant elite in the walled city of Intramuros, mostly pure-blooded Spanish officials and officers who held exclusive licenses from the Crown. For them, wealth was mobile, tied to the annual arrival of the galleon. Land was secondary, used mostly for subsistence or small-scale local trade. This system collapsed in the early 19th century. The Mexican War of Independence, 1810-1821, severed the supply of silver. The galleons stopped sailing. Spain, financially ruined by the Napoleonic Wars and the loss of its American colonies, was desperate to make its last major Asian possession profitable. In 1834, under pressure from foreign merchants and its own bankrupt treasury, the Spanish crown issued a royal decree that would change Philippine history forever. It opened the port of Manila to unrestricted international trade. The impact was immediate and seismic. British, American, French, and German trading houses established themselves along the Pasig River. Their demand was not for finished silks, but for raw agricultural export commodities: sugar, abaca, hemp, coffee, and tobacco. Suddenly, the source of supreme wealth was no longer a ship's hold in Manila Bay, but the vast, fertile plains of central Luzon, Negros, and the Bicol region. The era of the hacienda, the massive agricultural plantation, had begun. But here lies the critical, often overlooked genesis of the Filipino oligarchy. Who owned the land to turn into these cash crop empires? For centuries, Filipino farming communities operated under a system of communal land stewardship. Boundaries were traditional, based on rivers, trees, and oral history. Very few possessed formal Western-style land titles. Such a concept was alien. The Spanish colonial state saw this not as a legitimate system, but as a void, an absence of civilized ownership they could fill. They filled it with a series of land laws, the most pivotal being the Spanish Mortgage Law of 1893, Ley Hipotecaria. This law required all land to be formally registered and titled under a torrens system. The process was conducted in Spanish, mired in complex legalities, and required money for surveys and fees. For the illiterate, cash-poor farmer, it was an insurmountable barrier. For the already connected Spanish and mestizo, mixed race, elite in Manila, it was a once-in-a-millennium fire sale. This was the great legal land grab. Vast tracts of ancestral land were declared terreno baldio or royal land, considered vacant and state-owned. These lands were then granted, sold at auction, or otherwise transferred to individuals with the capital and connections to navigate the system. It was a wholesale transfer of the archipelago's most valuable asset, its soil, from the hands of the native, many to the portfolios of the privileged few. This process created the foundational inequality that still defines the Philippines, a nation of landless tillers and a tiny class of ultra-wealthy landed families. And into this historic moment of transfer stepped our protagonists. Antonio de Ayala, a Basque Spanish naval officer, arrived in Manila in 1824. He was ambitious, perceptive, and perfectly positioned. He partnered with Domingo Roxas, a Spanish industrialist who had already built a fortune in distilling, producing the iconic Ginebra San Miguel, and textile manufacturing. In 1834, the very year the ports opened, their partnership, Roxas y Compañía, made its defining move. They purchased a sprawling, marshy estate just southeast of Manila's walls, the Hacienda de San Pedro de Macati. The purchase price was 52,800 Spanish pesos. The size was approximately 1,600 hectares. To Antonio and Domingo, this was an agricultural investment. They planted sugarcane, built a sugar mill, and raised cattle. It was a productive, profitable hacienda, but its true value was not in the sugar it yielded, but in its location and its pristine, legally uncontestable title. They had secured, with a colonial piece of paper, what would become the future heart of the Philippine economy. The families fused through marriage, intertwining capital and land. Antonio de Ayala married Margarita Roxas, Domingo's daughter. Their legacy was continued by their descendant, Jacobo Zobel y Zangranes, an engineer who married Trinidad de Ayala, and whose son, Enrique Zobel de Ayala, would later guide the family into the 20th century. The Zobel de Ayala name was now cemented. Their early business was a mirror of the late Spanish colonial economy: sugar production, distilling, importing machinery, and even operating Manila's first tramcar line. They were rising stars in the Hacendaro class, but they were different. They were more cosmopolitan, more attuned to global business practices than the insular Spanish friars or the provincial sugar barons. They understood that their future depended on more than just crop prices. It depended on political agility. That agility was tested violently at the end of the 19th century. The Philippine Revolution erupted in 1896, aiming to overthrow Spanish rule. Then, in 1898, the Spanish-American War resulted in Spain ceding the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. In a flash, the Zobel de Ayala's world inverted. They were no longer the favored subjects of the ruling empire. They were now the landed elite of a colony being taken over by a new, industrial power with a stated mission to modernize and dismantle the old feudal structures. It was a moment of extreme peril. Many old Spanish families fled, their wealth confiscated or rendered worthless. The Ayala choice was strategic genius, adaptation, not resistance. Patriarch Jacobo Zobel, and later his son Enrique, made a conscious pivot. They began sending their sons to be educated at Harvard and MIT, not Salamanca. They learned English, studied American corporate law, and adopted Anglo-Saxon business models. They positioned themselves not as enemies of the new order, but as its essential local partners. When American officials and businessmen arrived, needing to understand the complex Philippine society, land laws, and labor force, they turned to families like the Ayalas. The family firm became a bridge. They leased land to American utilities. They provided local knowledge. They were the safe, Filipino-facing partners for American capital. In doing so, they performed the dynasty's first great magic trick. They transfused their wealth, rooted in Spanish colonial privilege, into the new circulatory system of American capitalism. Their land title from 1834 was now valid under American law. Their hacienda was no longer just a sugar plantation. It was a strategic asset on the edge of a growing American-designed city. By the 1930s, as the Philippines moved towards independence, the Zobel de Ayalas were not fatting aristocrats. They were evolving into institutional capitalists. They had survived the collapse of one empire by seamlessly integrating into the infrastructure of the next. The seed planted in the swamp of Makati in 1834 had not only taken root, it had weathered its first great storm. But the true tempests, World War, national independence, and the brutal politics of a new republic were still on the horizon. The dynasty was built. Now it would have to prove it could rule. The true crucible of a dynasty is not the calm of prosperity, but the fire of catastrophe. For the Zobel clan, the first 5 decades of the 20th century were a relentless series of such fires, each hot enough to incinerate a lesser fortune. They navigated the bloody end of Spanish rule, the ambiguous promise of American colonization, the apocalyptic nightmare of the Second World War, and the volatile dawn of an independent Philippine republic. Their passage through this period is a masterclass not merely in survival, but in strategic metamorphosis. They executed a breathtaking pivot, from being perceived as relics of a despised colonial past to positioning themselves as indispensable architects of a modern national future. This chapter is the story of that pivot, a move so audacious it involved betting the family's entire legacy on a vision to rebuild the capital of a nation from its own ancestral lands. The American takeover in 1898 was, initially, a profound threat. The new colonial administration, under William Howard Taft, spoke openly of dismantling the friar estates and large haciendas, which they viewed as feudal obstacles to creating a democratic yeoman-farmer society. For a family whose primary asset was a 1,600-hectare tract of land, this rhetoric was an existential warning siren. The Ayala's response was not to entrench or resist, but to ingeniously rebrand and align. Under the leadership of Enrique Zobel de Ayala, the family embarked on a deliberate campaign of Americanization. This was not mere cultural adoption, it was a corporate survival strategy. Enrique ensured his sons and heirs, most notably Alfonso Zobel de Ayala, were educated not in the halls of Salamanca, but in the lecture rooms of Harvard University and the laboratories of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. They returned not as Spanish-style gentleman farmers, but as engineers and financiers fluent in the language of American capitalism, corporate law, and modern management. This education was immediately leveraged. Ayala y Compañía transformed from a family-held hacienda operation into a sophisticated interface between incoming American capital and the local Philippine economy. When American firms like General Electric, IBM, or various mining and utility companies sought to establish operations, they faced a maze of unfamiliar land laws, labor customs, and political networks. The Ayalas became their essential guide and partner. They provided legal brokerage, secured land leases from their vast holdings, and offered a seal of legitimacy and local trust. In return, the family's wealth was seamlessly transferred from the decaying ledger of the Spanish Empire to the robust balance sheets of American-led global trade. Their land was no longer just a sugar plantation. It was now a strategic asset for American military planning, with the establishment of Fort McKinley adjacent to it in 1902 and commercial expansion. The family had successfully monetized their colonial-era title under a new colonial regime. Yet the most visionary stroke was still to come. In the 1920s and 1930s, while Manila remained a densely packed, politically turbulent, and architecturally stagnant capital, Enrique and his supremely strategic son-in-law, Colonel Joseph Joe McMicking, began to conceive a radical alternative. McMicking, a man with a military engineer's mind for planning and a futurist's imagination, saw the undeveloped, grassy hills of Makati not as farmland, but as a blank canvas for a dream city. He envisioned a decentralized, master-planned urban center that would embody efficiency, order, and modernity, everything old Manila was not. This was not a real estate development. It was an act of geopolitical speculation. The execution was methodical and brilliant. They began with foundational order, surveying a rational grid of wide, tree-lined avenues, Paseo de Roxas, Ayala Avenue, and installing modern water, sewage, and electrical infrastructure before any significant construction. They eschewed outright land sales, instead instituting a long-term leasehold system, typically for 50 years, renewable. This ensured perpetual income and, more critically, perpetual control over the area's development, architecture, and social character. To guarantee exclusivity and create a powerful coalition of interests, they sold large parcels to other elite families, the Arantes, the Elizaldes, the Madrigals, effectively making them stakeholders in the Makati project. They were constructing a fortified enclave for capital itself. Then, history delivered its most brutal test yet. The Japanese invasion in December 1941 plunged the Philippines into darkness. The 3-year occupation was a period of terror, economic collapse, and sheer survival. Family assets were frozen or seized, operations ground to a halt. Yet, in the grim twilight of 1940-41945, as American forces prepared to retake Manila, McMicking and the Ayalas saw a horrific but clear opportunity. They understood that the impending battle would likely destroy the old city, and it did. The Battle of Manila, February-March 1945, was a cataclysm. The Intramuros walls were pounded to dust, the business district of Escolta was incinerated, and over 100,000 civilians perished. The historic capital was literally erased. As the dust settled on a nation traumatically freed but physically shattered, the Ayala family presented a ready-made solution to the government of President Manuel Roxas. While Manila was a smoldering ruin, their Makati estate was largely intact, spared the worst of the urban warfare. McMicking's pre-war plans were now not just a business proposal, but a national recovery plan. With unparalleled persuasive power, they argued that rebuilding the old, inefficient Manila was a backward-looking mistake. The future, they insisted, was Makati, a planned, modern, secure center from which to govern and rebuild the economy. The masterstroke was the anchoring strategy. To ensure Makati's irreversible ascendancy, they didn't just sell lots. They strategically donated land and offered irresistible terms to cornerstone institutions. They gave land for a new Supreme Court complex. They wooed the Central Bank of the Philippines with a prime, symbolic plot on Ayala Avenue, effectively making it the temple of the nation's financial system. They attracted the Securities and Exchange Commission and key government ministries. This created an irresistible gravitational pull. Where the central bank and regulators went, all private banks, from the traditional Filipino-Chinese banks of Binondo to the new international branches, were forced to follow to be close to the regulators. Corporate headquarters, legal firms, embassies, and luxury service providers flooded in to be near the financial core. By the late 1950s, the transformation was complete. Makati was no longer the Ayala family's hacienda. It was the Philippines' new downtown. The opening of the Manila Peninsula Hotel in 1976 on Ayala land cemented its status as the nexus of elite social and business life. The family had achieved the unthinkable. They had leveraged a colonial land grant into the power to relocate the economic heart of a sovereign nation. They emerged from the war not as survivors, but as sovereigns of a domain they had created. The Ayala Corporation, formally incorporated as a modern holding company in 1968, now sat atop an asset of unimaginable value, the very ground zero of Philippine capitalism. But to secure their dynasty for the next century, they knew that collecting rent from this golden land was not enough. They needed to own the pipes, the wires, the networks, and the vaults that made the economy atop their land function. The era of the diversified conglomerate was about to begin, and the Ayalas were ready to build an empire within their empire. To own the most valuable land in a nation is a monumental achievement, but to own the systems that give that land its purpose, the capital that builds upon it, the communication that connects it, the water that sustains it, and the energy that powers it, is the mark of a dynasty engineered for eternity. For the Zobel de Ayala family, the establishment of Makati as the Philippines' financial core was merely the prelude. The subsequent and more profound act was the deliberate, strategic construction of a diversified conglomerate so vast, so deeply embedded in the vital arteries of daily life, that the family's fortune became functionally synonymous with the operational infrastructure of the modern Philippine state. This was not mere business expansion. It was a calculated project in structural omnipresence, a move from being masters of geography to becoming masters of utility, ensuring their influence would persist as long as the nation required banks, phones, water, and electricity. The architects of this grand design were Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala II, JAZA, and his brother Fernando Zobel de Ayala, who assumed leadership in the 1990s with a vision that transcended asset accumulation. They viewed their role through the lens of national infrastructure development. Their strategy targeted sectors characterized by high barriers to entry, intense regulation, massive capital requirements, and most importantly, inescapable public demand. Their playbook was consistent and formidable. Identify a critical sector ripe for reform or disruption. Leverage the family's unparalleled reputation for stability to secure the necessary government franchise or concession. Form a joint venture with a world-leading technical operator. And deploy patient, deep capital subsidized by the immense cash flows of their real estate empire. This long-term horizon, free from the short-term pressures of public markets, allowed them to endure initial losses for ultimate dominance. The four pillars they erected were financial services, BPI, telecommunications, Globe, water infrastructure, Manila Water, and energy, ACEN. Pillar 1. The Sovereign of Capital Bank of the Philippine Islands, BPI. While the Ayalas had long been associated with BPI, the oldest bank in Southeast Asia, founded in 1851, their decisive move to take a controlling interest in 1969 was a strategic masterstroke that signaled their conglomerate ambitions. Under Ayala stewardship, BPI was transformed from a respected institution into the financial circulatory system of the entire Ayala ecosystem. It became the preferred banker for the multinational corporations constructing their regional headquarters on Ayala land, and for the wealthy elites purchasing units in Ayala's premium residential enclaves. This created a powerful, self-reinforcing economic loop. Ayala land developments generated prime collateral, transaction fees, and deposit streams for BPI, while BPI's liquidity and project financing arms provided the ready capital for Ayala's next cycle of colossal developments. Under JAZA's leadership, BPI aggressively pursued growth through strategic mergers and acquisitions, most notably its merger with Far East Bank in 2000, solidifying its position as one of the country's systemic Big Three banks. Crucially, BPI was an early mover in digital banking, capturing the burgeoning tech-savvy middle class. This pillar ensured the family didn't just participate in finance. They profited from every major financial interaction in the growing economy, from colossal corporate loans and treasury operations to retail mortgages and digital wallet transactions, embedding themselves at the very heart of capital movement. Pillar 2. The architect of connection, Globe Telecom. In 1992, Ayala made its boldest and most perilous bet, entering the telecommunications arena to challenge the decades-long monopoly of Philippine Long-Distance Telephone Company, PLDT. In partnership with Singapore Telecommunications, Singtel, they launched Globe Telecom. The ensuing decade was a brutal war of attrition, characterized by vicious price competition and staggering capital expenditure. Billions of dollars spent to build a digital cellular and fixed-line network from the ground up. Skeptics viewed it as a quixotic drain on the family fortune. However, the Ayalas, insulated by the robust profits from their real estate and banking pillars, possessed the patient capital necessary to play a decades-long game. Their endurance was vindicated by twin revolutions: the explosion of the overseas Filipino worker, OFW market, which craved affordable international calls, and the advent of the mobile internet. Globe evolved from a distant competitor into a fierce market leader, driving innovation in mobile services and broadband. This conquest granted Ayala something beyond mere profit: sovereignty over the nation's digital nervous system. In the 21st century, this meant controlling the primary channels for personal communication, mass media, e-commerce, digital finance, and even governance. It made them gatekeepers of the modern social and economic experience, an asset of immense strategic and political power. Pillar 3. The custodian of necessity, Manila Water. Having secured influence over capital and information, Ayala's next move targeted the most elemental human need: water. In 1997, following the Philippine government's historic privatization of the Metropolitan Waterworks and Sewerage System, MWSS, an Ayala-led consortium won the 25-year concession to manage the east zone of Metro Manila, serving over 6 million people through Manila Water Company. This was a masterclass in essential service capitalism. They took control of a dilapidated, inefficient, and corruption-plagued public utility. Partnering with international experts from United Utilities, they executed a legendary turnaround. They expanded service coverage from 66% to nearly 100%, dramatically reduced non-revenue water, losses from leaks and theft, from over 60% to less than 12%, and transformed the utility into a highly profitable, dividend-generating marvel. The strategic brilliance was multifaceted. First, it provided a recession-proof, annuity-like cash flow stream, as water is the last bill people stop paying. Second, it bestowed immense political and social capital. Being the provider of clean, reliable water to a quarter of the national capital region made the corporation indispensable to public welfare and state function, creating a formidable buffer against regulatory aggression or political enmity. Pillar 4. The Power Broker, ACEN Corporation. Completing the quartet of essentials, Ayala moved decisively into power generation. Through AC Energy, now ACEN Corporation, launched in 2011, they entered the energy sector with a distinct focus on renewable energy, solar, wind, and geothermal. This was a late but perfectly timed entry. It aligned impeccably with global environmental, social, and governance (ESG) trends, critically burnishing the conglomerate's reputation for responsible capitalism, which is key to attracting low-cost international financing. It also served a direct operational purpose, securing a cleaner, more stable, and potentially cheaper power supply for their own energy-intensive portfolio of malls, offices, hotels, and developments. Furthermore, it positioned them as a strategic partner in the government's own pressing agenda for energy security and independence. They transitioned from passive consumers of electricity to active producers of the nation's vital power, weaving another critical strand of public infrastructure into their corporate tapestry. The resulting conglomerate is a masterpiece of synergistic integration, creating a captive, self-reinforcing economic universe. Visualize the flow. A renewable power plant operated by ACEN supplies electricity to an Ayala mall. The mall's tenants, who likely hold corporate accounts with BPI, pay substantial rents to Ayala land. Millions of shoppers and employees within the Ayala ecosystem use Globe's network for connectivity, mobile payments, and data. The entire complex is hydrated and serviced by Manila Water. Profits from each entity flow upward to the Ayala Corporation Holding Company, which then reinvests in new strategic land, cutting-edge technology, and further regional expansion. This is not a random portfolio. It is a deliberately engineered closed-loop system where each entity fortifies and enriches the others. This brilliant diversification serves as the dynasty's ultimate perpetuity and protection machine. It provides flawless, built-in risk mitigation. When cyclical real estate markets soften, the steady, utility-like cash flows from water, telecoms, and banking provide stabilizing ballast. When the political climate grows hostile or populist, their identity as massive employers of tens of thousands and as providers of essential public services, water, connectivity, power grants them a form of functional invulnerability. They have engineered a transition from the wealth of colonial land ownership to becoming embedded institutional custodians of the national operating system. The Zobel de Ayala family no longer merely possesses great assets. They own critical, interlocking segments of the country's foundational infrastructure, ensuring their legacy, influence, and prosperity are as enduring as the basic human and economic needs they have learned to master and provide. Building towers of glass and steel is an act of visible power. Building systems of governance, succession, and reputational defense that allow those towers to stand unshaken for 2 centuries is an act of invisible, supreme genius. For the Zobel de Ayala family, the transition from a powerful business house to an enduring national institution required mastering a second, more subtle curriculum, the art of dynastic stewardship. This chapter pulls back the curtain on the less celebrated machinery that preserves their empire, the corporate structures that professionalize family control, The agile dance with political power, the meticulous protocols for scandal containment, and the sacred, unbreakable rights of succession that ensure the flame is passed without flickering. The great professionalization, from family kitchen to corporate boardroom. A critical, self-imposed revolution within the Ayala dynasty was the deliberate erasure of overt family rule from daily operations. By the 1970s and 80s, as the group expanded into complex, capital-intensive industries like telecoms and utilities, the family patriarchs recognized a hard truth. Their own descendants, however well-educated, might not be the best managers for a multinational conglomerate. Their solution was radical for a traditional Filipino family: professionalization. They established a clear divide. The family would remain the ultimate owners, setting the long-term strategic vision and guarding the core values of integrity and patience through their control of the board and a network of holding companies and foundations. However, the day-to-day command of each major business unit, Ala Land, BPI, Globe, Manila Water, was handed to a cadre of non-family career professionals. These CEOs and presidents were often recruited from top global firms, prestigious MBA programs, or the technical core of the military. This move inoculated the company against the nepotism, internal rivalries, and emotional decision-making that have destroyed countless family empires. It turned the family business into a public institution with a private soul, ensuring operational excellence while preserving dynastic control. Political jiu-jitsu, engagement without enslavement. In a nation where political winds shift violently, the Ayalas have perfected a survival technique best described as principled neutrality. They are consummate institutionalists. Their loyalty is not to any president, political party, or ideology, but to the stability and development of the Philippine state as a concept. They engage deeply with every administration, offering their technical expertise and execution capacity for national projects, be it infrastructure PPPs under President Aquino, build under President Duterte, or digitalization under President Marcos Jr. However, they meticulously avoid becoming cronies. They never put a family member in a high political office, rarely make overtly partisan donations, and maintain a discreet public distance from the political fray. This was tested most severely during the Marcos Sr. dictatorship. While other oligarchs were stripped of their assets for opposing the regime or became overly dependent on it, the Ayalas survived by flying under the radar. They focused on running their core businesses efficiently, avoided political statements, and were perceived as useful, technocratic, and non-threatening. Their competence was their shield. This same strategy allows them to work seamlessly with every successive government, making them a permanent fixture in a landscape of temporary powers. The firewall, containing the 2019 Manila water crisis. Every dynasty faces its moment of public inferno. For the Ayalas, it was the catastrophic water shortage in their Manila water concession area in 2019. After years of being hailed as a model of efficient privatization, the system broke down, leaving millions of homes in East Manila with dry taps for weeks. Public fury was volcanic. President Rodrigo Duterte, in a series of explosive speeches, accused them of economic plunder and threatened to throw executives in jail and cancel their concession agreements. This was an existential threat, not just a business setback. The family's response revealed a pre-rehearsed crisis playbook. Phase 1, immediate, unqualified apology. Senior leaders, including Jaime Augusto Zobel Ayala, JAZA, appeared before the media not with lawyers and excuses, but with bowed heads and direct apologies. They accepted full responsibility. Phase 2, visible, all-out operational surge. They mobilized billions of pesos and armies of engineers, working 24/7 to fix the infrastructure, drilling new wells, and upgrading treatment plants. They made the effort hypervisible to the public. Phase 3, quiet, strategic negotiation. Behind the scenes, they engaged in grueling talks with the government, ultimately agreeing to a painful restructuring of the water concession agreements, forfeiting future claims and accepting new, less favorable terms. They sacrificed short-term profit to preserve the long-term asset. The crisis demonstrated that while their reputation could be bruised, their institutional resilience was unbreakable. They absorbed the blow, adapted, and lived to fight another day. The sacred transition, the succession protocol. Perhaps the most guarded secret of the Ayala longevity is their succession ritual. It is a process stripped of sentimentality, resembling a corporate meritocracy blended with royal grooming. Potential heirs from the 8th generation are observed from a young age. They are required to prove themselves outside the family empire, typically with stellar careers in international finance, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, management consulting, McKinsey, or tech giants, Google, abroad. Only after earning external validation can they enter Ayala, and they start not as vice presidents, but as mid-level managers or in special projects. Their performance is evaluated by the professional CEOs, not just their parents. The final selection for chairman or president is made by a council of family elders and key non-family board members, based on proven competence, strategic vision, and, critically, temperament, the humility to serve the institution and the wisdom to prioritize the dynasty's perpetuity over personal glory. This rigorous, almost Spartan, process prevents destructive sibling rivalry and ensures that leadership is a duty, not a birthright. The smooth transitions from generation to generation are not accidents. They are the fruits of this meticulous, decades-long cultivation. The narrative engine, rebranding the oligarch. In an age of rising inequality and social media-driven populism, the Ayalas are acutely aware that wealth alone is a liability. Their final stewardship tactic is narrative control. They have embarked on a comprehensive campaign to rebrand the family from oligarchs to nation-building partners. Their corporate communications tirelessly highlight their investments in renewable energy, ACEN solar and wind farms, creating green cities, empowering MSMEs through BPI loans, bridging the digital divide with Globe's educational initiatives, and funding cutting-edge Filipino startups through their venture capital arm, Kickstart Ventures. They frame their story not as one of inheritance, but of reinvestment, portraying their wealth as a perpetual engine for national progress. This narrative is woven into every annual report, sustainability summit, and carefully curated media interview, crafting a public image of a responsible, forward-thinking, and essentially benevolent institution. Through this multifaceted doctrine, professional governance, political agnosticism, crisis containment, meritocratic succession, and narrative stewardship, the Zobel de Ayala family has engineered something far more durable than a business conglomerate. They have built a self-correcting, self-preserving socioeconomic organism. It is designed to learn from shocks, adapt to new realities, and project an aura of indispensable stability. The empire, therefore, is no longer just about the Ayala name. It is about the Ayala system, a code of conduct and governance so robust that it ensures the wealth born from a Spanish land title will navigate the unpredictable currents of the future, not as a relic, but as a reigning and resilient force. Stepping onto the world stage is the ambition of many corporations. Defining the very ground upon which that stage is built is the ambition of a dynasty. For the Zobel de Ayala clan, the journey into the 21st century is orchestrated by its 8th generation, a cohort of leaders who are no longer mere stewards of a legacy, but are active architects of a new, boundaryless future. This generation faces a radically different Philippines, digitally native, globally connected, socially conscious, and impatient with old hierarchies. Their mandate is not simply to preserve the empire, but to re-engineer it for a new world, venturing into venture capital, sustainability tech, global expansion, and the intangible realms of data and influence, all while maintaining the delicate balance between disruptive innovation and the rock-solid stability that is the family's brand. This chapter explores how the heirs of the hacienda are building a future where the most valuable real estate may no longer be in Makati, but in the cloud, in a lithium battery, or in a startup's code. The heirs apparent, a new breed of leaders. The current torchbearers, most visibly Jaime Alfonso Zobel de Ayala, son of Jaza and his cousin Fernando Zobel de Ayala, represent a synthesis of old and new. Educated at the world's premier institutions, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and forged in the crucibles of global finance and tech, they possess a dual consciousness. They speak the language of Silicon Valley disruption with the same fluency as the language of Ayala's prudence. They are not rebels, they are evolutionaries. Their leadership style is less about patriarchal decree and more about curation and ecosystem building. They see Ayala Corporation not just as a portfolio of companies, but as a platform that can incubate, accelerate, and scale the next wave of economic value. This represents a fundamental shift from being the dominant player in every sector to becoming the orchestrator of the playing field itself. Pillar 1. Betting on the future, kickstart ventures and corporate venture capital. Understanding that the next Globe or Manila Water might not be built in their own boardrooms, the eighth generation made a decisive move into venture capital. In 2012, they launched Kickstart Ventures, the corporate venture capital arm of Globe Telecom and, by extension, the Ayala Group. This was not a side project. It was a strategic reconnaissance mission into the future. Kickstart invests in early to growth stage tech startups across Southeast Asia, with a focus on fintech, edtech, healthtech, and sustainability. They have backed hundreds of startups, including notable successes like Kumu, a Filipino live streaming app, and Edamama, a parenting e-commerce platform. The strategy is multi-layered. It provides financial returns from high-growth sectors, offers Ayala's core businesses, BPI, Globe, Ayala Land, first look at innovative technologies and business models, and most importantly, integrates the Dynasty into the disruptive startup ecosystem, ensuring they are allies, not targets, of the next generation of entrepreneurs. It is a hedge against their own potential obsolescence. Pillar 2. The Green Mandate, ACEN, and the Sovereign Transition. If their ancestors' mandate was to build a city, the eighth generation's is to decarbonize it. They have placed a colossal, existential bet on ACEN Corporation, their listed energy platform, with the audacious goal of achieving 100% renewable energy generation by 2025 and becoming a net zero company by 2050. This is not mere philanthropy or PR. It is a strategic recalibration for a carbon-constrained world. ACEN is rapidly developing one of the largest renewable energy portfolios in the region, with projects in the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, and Australia. This global push does two things. It future-proofs their own energy supply, and that of their malls, offices, and developments, against volatile fossil fuel prices and regulatory carbon taxes, and it positions Ayala as a leader in the global energy transition, attracting ESG-focused capital from sovereign wealth funds and international investors. Their wealth is being actively transplanted from the carbon-based economy of the 20th century into the green economy of the 21st. Pillar 3. Redefining real estate, from landlord to life curator. Ayala Land, the group's foundational cash cow, is undergoing its own revolution under the eighth generation's vision. The model is shifting from selling square meters of space to selling curated experiences and integrated lifestyles. Developments like Verdes North in Quezon City and the continued expansion of Bonifacio Global City, BGC, are not just office and residential towers. They are designed as walkable, mixed-use, sustainable mini-cities with their own parks, museums, bike lanes, and arts programs. Furthermore, Ayala Land is aggressively pushing into the affordable and middle-income housing segment through brands like Amya. This serves a dual purpose. It taps into a massive, underserved market for growth, and it strategically diffuses the potent social critique that the Ayala empire only caters to the elite. They are building not just for the 1%, but for the aspiring middle class, weaving their brand into the Philippine dream at multiple income levels. Pillar 4. The Global Gambit, International Expansion as a Necessity. For the first time in its history, the Ayala Empire is making substantial, strategic bets outside the Philippines. This is driven by a cold calculation. The Philippine market, while growing, has limits. To sustain the growth expected of a conglomerate of their size, they must become regional champions. Their international forays are focused and leverage their core competencies. ACEN in renewable energy across Asia-Pacific, Globe's B2B enterprise solutions for Filipino and regional corporations, and Ayala lands exploratory ventures into mixed-use developments in key ASEAN cities. This outward focus marks a critical evolution from a national institution to a global Filipino powerhouse, reducing their overexposure to domestic political and economic cycles. Navigating the new social contract, the paradox of visible wealth. The eighth generation's greatest challenge may not be business competition, but socio-political perception. In an era of viral social media and deepening inequality, the visible trappings of dynastic wealth are a liability. The family manages this with a carefully calibrated visibility. They are active on social media, but in a polished, corporate manner, highlighting business milestones, sustainability efforts, and philanthropic work through the Ayala Foundation, education, disaster relief, arts. Personal displays of extreme luxury are kept discreetly private. They engage with the public as technocrats and philanthropists, not as celebrities or hedonists. This is a continuous, delicate dance to maintain their elite status while appearing as humble servants of national progress. The eighth generation of Zobel de Ayala stands at a unique crossroads. They are leveraging the immense financial capital and institutional trust built over 180 years to fund a pivot into the frontiers of the new economy. Venture capital, renewables, digital ecosystems, and global markets. They are attempting to prove that a dynasty born from colonial land can transform itself into a future-facing, innovative, and globally relevant institution. Their success will determine whether the Ayala name remains a cornerstone of Philippine life for another century or becomes a magnificent relic of a bygone age. The bets have been placed. The future is now their most important project. A dynasty that has weathered revolutions, world wars, and economic cataclysms does not measure its lifespan in years, but in its ability to become an unquestioned component of a nation's destiny. As we conclude the saga of the Zobel de Ayala family, we confront the ultimate questions. What is the true source of their seemingly eternal reign? Is it genius, luck, or something more systemic? And in a country marked by profound inequality, what is the cost of such concentrated, inherited power? This final chapter examines the legacy, the critiques, and the intricate equation that allows this dynasty to not just survive, but to perpetually renew its mandate to rule from behind boardroom doors. The pillars of perpetuity, deconstructing the Ayala algorithm. The Ayala endurance is not mystical. It is the result of a replicable, though immensely difficult to execute, strategic algorithm. We can distill it into 5 core principles. The asset system shift. They mastered the transition from owning static assets, land, to controlling dynamic systems, finance, telecoms, water, energy. Assets can be seized or devalued. Systems become indispensable. The time arbitrage advantage. They operate on a multi-generational time horizon that no publicly traded company or political administration can match. This allows them to make decade-long bets, like Globe Telecom or ACEN, that crush short-term focused competitors. The professionalization paradox. They brilliantly separated bloodline from management, instilling meritocracy at operational levels while retaining family vision and control at the strategic apex. This prevents decay from within. The political neutrality doctrine. By engaging with all states as a permanent institution rather than aligning with any single politician, they avoid the fatal risk of cronyism and outlast every political cycle. The narrative value loop. They continuously invest in crafting a public narrative of nation-building and responsible stewardship, which in turn protects their social license to operate and adds intangible value to their brands, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of trust and profit. This algorithm transforms the family from mere wealth holders into permanent trustees of a significant portion of the national economy. The shadow of the hacienda, enduring critiques and controversies. To tell the Ayala story only as one of triumph is to ignore the long shadow it casts. Their legacy is inextricably linked to the foundational injustices of the Philippine political economy. The original sin of land. Their origin is forever tied to the 19th century legal land grab that dispossessed countless Filipino farmers. The core of their wealth, Makati, is built on this contested transfer. While they have built a city upon it, the question of historical legitimacy remains a quiet, persistent murmur. The oligarchy problem. The Ayalas are the quintessential example of the persistent Philippine oligarchy, a class of families whose economic power, derived from colonial-era advantages, translates into disproportionate political and social influence. Critics argue this stifles true competition, concentrates wealth, and creates a form of private governance that can undermine democratic accountability. The inequality machine. Their business model, while creating jobs and infrastructure, inherently benefits from and can exacerbate inequality. High-end malls, luxury condominiums, and premium banking services cater to the elite, while their forays into affordable housing and microfinance can be seen as ways to profit from, rather than solve, the vast base of the pyramid. The 2019 Manila water crisis laid bare how their control of an essential utility could lead to widespread suffering when corporate failure occurs. The velvet glove of influence. Their political neutrality is often seen as a sophisticated form of influence peddling. Their massive resources, legal teams, and army of lobbyists allow them to shape legislation and regulations on land use, banking, telecoms, water, in ways that favor incumbent, capital-heavy players like themselves, often at the expense of smaller competitors and consumer welfare. The Filipino paradox. Public resentment and prudent admiration. The public sentiment towards the Ayalas is a study in national contradiction. There is underlying resentment towards their privileged birthright and their embodiment of a system where family name dictates destiny. Yet, this coexists with a widespread, if grudging, admiration for their competence, stability, and quality. Filipinos may critique the oligarchs, but they trust BPI with their savings, rely on Globe for connectivity, shop at Ayala malls for convenience and safety, and dream of living in an Ayala-developed community. The dynasty has, in a sense, engineered its own societal indispensability, making critique feel abstract against the concrete reality of their reliable services. The final frontier. Can the dynasty outlast the nation-state? Looking ahead, the greatest threat to the Ayala dynasty may not be a rival conglomerate or a populist president, but technological disruption and climate change. Here, their eighth generation's bets are revealing. By pouring capital into venture capital kickstart, they aim to co-opt or control disruptive tech. By leading the green energy transition, ACEN, they aim to own the next epic's infrastructure. Their strategy is clear: to ensure that the future disruptions are channeled through Ayala platforms, not around them. They are betting that their institutional scale and capital can assimilate innovation faster than innovation can displace them. Conclusion: the unending reign. The story of the Zobel de Ayala family is the story of the Philippines in microcosm, a narrative of colonial inheritance, traumatic upheaval, resilient reinvention, dazzling growth, and unresolved inequality. They are not just a business family, they are a force of nature within the Philippine landscape. They have built an empire that is less about a surname and more about a perpetual motion machine of capital, influence, and adaptation. Their reign appears unending because they have mastered the art of becoming too essential to fail, too adaptable to become obsolete, and too prestigious to openly dismantle. They have moved from being masters of land to masters of the systems that make land valuable, and now to masters of the narratives that justify their mastery. The richest Spanish dynasty in the Philippines no longer thrives merely as colonial masters. They thrive as sovereigns of a complex, self-sustaining kingdom they have built within, and in many ways above, the Republic itself. Their final, unspoken lesson is that the ultimate power lies not in ruling overtly, but in making your continued reign the most logical, inevitable, and quietly accepted outcome for the nation you call home.